basically want to share some of the reasons why I so admire and respect Dr. Steve, as his students call him. He has a really good heart. He really cares about his students. And that ethic of care is not about dumbing things down, because that really isn't a caring thing to do. He challenges his students, but he also supports them and helps them learn and embrace new ways of thinking about things. He's passionate about his work. I love talking to him about teaching and his ideas and those kinds of things. A year ago, when I was considering running for chair, did a lot of thinking about what my limitations were. And I felt like if I was going to go up for chair, I needed a really good assistant chair. And so even before I decided to run, I went to Steve and I said, if I run and if I win, would you be willing to be the assistant chair? And I want to tell you why. Aside from all those wonderful things that I just said about him, the thing that I appreciate about Steve is that I knew that he would give me different ways of looking at things. That he kind of has this unique perspective on the world, on knowledge, on teaching, on what we're doing in the department, and that he would provide me with a way of thinking about our work within the English department in really new and innovative ways. I've seen that with his work in the curriculum committee. I knew that he could do that as assistant chair as well. I also knew that if we disagreed, it would be okay, that we could share ideas and have different opinions about things, and that we'd still respect each other. And I think that that kind of thing can be rare sometimes. And so I knew that it would give me new ways of looking at things, and even if I didn't embrace it 100%, it would be okay. And lastly, I knew that I would be a better chair because of conversations with him, because of the ways that he looked at the world and the work that we were doing within the department. So I basically told him that I wasn't going to run for chair if he would not be my assistant chair. So you're stuck with me because he agreed. But I hope that you will see just the evidence of his generosity as a colleague, as a teacher, as a human being, and know that he makes our department a much better place. So, Dr. Steve Adisasmito-Smith.
That's a very nice way of saying you used blackmail. He came to me in person. I couldn't say no. So, this is the first time I've been mic'd and marked now. And I move around, I'm nervous, but it allows me to be a moving target in case you decide to throw things. Because I'm going to raise some things that might be controversial, I hope. Maybe not for some of you. But it's, by the way, you guys suckered me into this, right? It's the end of the semester, exhausted. So I'm going to ramble in front of you. And it's just a position talk, really, because Megan said, give us hope for the humanities. And it's apt for a conference that centers in part on utopia, right? So it's going to be utopic thinking. And I'm going to make a pitch and try to come up with, or suggest a way that we can go forward in the humanities and have hope. But it may be a different way than what you've heard before. And it's interesting, some of the comments, very good conference, I enjoyed the papers tremendously. And some of the comments that I heard in the papers or in questions kind of got me thinking this way too. I'll quickly change a few things. So the pitch, well, first of all, I've been hearing over the last decade a lot of pervasive metaphors for critical work and what we're doing. And so the three of them I'm going to keep going back to, right? One is entering the conversation, right? You go into the conversation, there's a conversation already going on, you find out what's going on, you listen to it, and then try to find a way to position yourself in that conversation. The second one is adopting a new lens, right? Get a new lens, a new theoretical lens, a way of looking at the world and interpreting things. And the third one, and that's really been emphasized in this conference, interestingly, is performance, or performativity. But I'm going to make a pitch for taking all of that and trying to get the humanities in conversation with the sciences again. Because there are people who are trying to shut us down and shut us out, and that might happen. STEM is trying to stem us, right? But I think that we have a responsibility to respond to that, and I think there are productive ways of doing so, but it involves a new way of entry into that relationship. So, starting out with pictures of nature, because I like thinking in very personal and embodied ways. I find that works best for me. And I have been profoundly influenced both by eco-criticism and by evolutionary and biological studies, cognitive science. So I like to remember there's a real world out there, a world beyond our discourse. One of the founding statements of eco-criticism, Kate Soper, was a bit frustrated with all the talking about talking that is only focusing on discourse and talking about our reality as radically socially constructed or linguistically constructed. And she said, language doesn't have a hole in the ozone layer. There is a real world out there and we're living in it. We have to respond to it because we're at a point of crisis and it's coming from many different directions. So that's the spirit I'm going into this in. So my particular work is Sanskrit. That's a whole story. One of my friend's fiancés was a computer engineer. I met him for the first time when I was getting into this, and he heard I was in comparative literature. And after talking to me the whole evening, you know, I was a computer engineer, he said, you know, you seem fairly intelligent. Why are you going into literature? And I gave him a lengthy answer. And he said, that's the first time I've heard somebody who had a reason for doing it. Well, so I did something silly studying Sanskrit, an ancient language, not quite dead. There's still some living native speakers, believe it or not. But I try to go back to another age, another time, going from here and now to there and then, trying to get a sense of that world and the way the world looked to them, because we all have our worldviews, and the worldviews that seem entirely convincing in the past no longer are, right? If you're removed from it, you can see it. If you also see that difference, the difference of history, you might call into question some of the things that you believe here and now, too, because you realize, well, that might not look so good in the future. So I'm going to be using as my sort of example a poet that I've been working with and translating, who's writing during the classical period in India, in the Gupta Empire. Gupta Empire was a multinational empire, had trade routes going all over. There's the Silk Roads by land and by sea. Cosmopolitan, international, a lot of different things coming together. She's writing actually after the fall of the Gupta Empire in a place slightly to the south of it. And when I'm approaching these poets, well, first of all, I started because I was teaching these classes in ancient world literature, and I noticed the anthologies, largely men, male authors, writing for male audiences. You know, 90%, 70%, and then there were 20% that were anonymous, but clearly men, at least from the way the perspective was positioned and what they were saying. So I started looking for female authors, and I found some. It was difficult to find these ancient Indian women poets. I started off looking through all these different anthologies. It wasn't gathered together. The male editors and male collectors of traditional Sanskrit poetry in Sanskrit didn't think that women were worth considering as a separate category at all, so they only preserved a few poems by women and they scattered them amongst different anthologies. I did find, luckily, one anthology of Bengali working back in the 1930s, had a new way of looking at things, and he went through all the different anthologies and gathered them together. I'm so grateful for him. He's dead, but he's my colleague. So I want to approach these poets, you know, but here I am in the US now, male, white, etc. And I don't want to be somebody who's appropriating somebody else's work or dominating. I want instead to listen and to share. So the very task of approaching them. So I'm going to do something, I'm going to be an idiot for just a second. I'm always an idiot, but I'm going to foreground it for a minute to make a point, right? So there's what I have to work with in the original. It's one of the poems. I'm going to go over translation of it later. But let's see if I should do this. I will do it from the paper while you look up there. So what it says, oh wait, no, pause. Let's enter into a conversation about that. What have you got to say? Well, some notions of entering a conversation have heard about people talking about everyone becoming an equal in knowledge creation. And you enter into any conversation as absolute equals. But we can't do that. Because people have different knowledges, different experiences, they're experts in different ways. That's why I'm doing this, to be an idiot. Because what would you say? Lovely curvy shapes. Oh, that's so beautiful. I like their little lines at the top. Oh, look at those squiggly things, right? Now, even if I did the next work and say, Adisasmito-Smith, the nice thing is I had a couple mispronunciations there. You don't know. Right? So let's enter into a conversation about that. What did you think of the sounds? Sounds weird. It's like when my wife tried to teach her first son Indonesian after she'd been speaking English for years, and he started crying and said, "Mommy, speak normal." Okay, well you can, there are phonic qualities, prosodic qualities to the sound. You could talk about the sibilance and the softness and so forth. There are things you can do. But to get a full entry, you have to have more. You have to have a knowledge base. And that's what all of us are providing. Now I was using this as an example, but I am serious. Everyone in this room has different experiences. What expert means is that you have an experience in something. And in entering into conversations with the sciences, there are experts. I'm not going to achieve the level of math of Stephen Hawking, but I want to hear what he has to say, and I'm glad that he's written things in a way that I can understand. And it's a matter of degree. And it's always going to be a matter of degree. And if we take all of our knowledge pool and all of our experiences and expertise and pool them together, maybe we'll go somewhere. All right. Now for a different kind of idiocy. Okay, so that's what I'm trying to do. And I have to be dumb and corny. I couldn't do this without being dumb and corny. And Megan see I did it after all. But come on, by tomorrow, all you're going to remember are these acronyms anyway from this talk. So, steamy hope, right? What kind of hope do we have in the humanities? Well, it's arts and humanities, right? Wonder and appreciation. And that's part of what arts and humanities are for me. I just see something beautiful, hear something beautiful, and I just stop and go, right? I do hope for a little bit more, though. I want to go and explore arts and humanities in action. I've discovered something. I've thought something new. I have a new vision. That's what I hope for from the humanities. But what do we fear? Or what I fear anyway. I fear half-assed humanities and arts and a reaction from the rest of the academic community. That's what we fear, right? Engineers, chemists, But do we deserve that sometimes? Right? Because are the things we're saying made available to others? Are they grounded in something? What kind of logic and reasoning and evidence do we have? A different kind. I really sincerely think that the hard sciences are analytic. They break things down into the smallest particles, and they get a great degree of accuracy and control from that. I think that the humanities tend to be synthetic. They take the bits and pieces and build a cumulative experience, a cumulative knowledge. It's a different movement, but not a different mind. So, I mean, here's the thing, and I don't want to demonize the other here. That would be bad, wouldn't it? Even if some of them are doing it, if we fall into their trap. Now, there are people, I just saw online yet another rant against the humanities. Somebody from Silicon Valley, which I won't name, but he was saying that basically, let's see, it's empty sentiment, it's entertainment, and it's people being PC, of course, social justice warriors, the usual, right? And he saw nothing good for it. And there are people who think that way, and I actually think we need to be aware of that and be careful, because funding and time and attention, faculty lines, this is going to get cut off, or at least some people want it to. Oh, I was preparing this, and I was teaching Ancient World Lit, and I was teaching the history of the first emperor of China, Qin Shi Huangdi, right? And, well, I thought about this because he wanted to keep the stem of his time. Agriculture, canals, and astronomy, right, practical knowledge. He wanted to, and in fact did, cut off all other sources of knowledge, burned the books, and burned those who hid them or those who wrote them if they disagreed with him. So he got rid of, and it specifies this in the history, he got rid of philosophy and poetry and, what was the third thing? History. History, philosophy, and poetry. And I asked my students, why those three? Because you would think, you know, this is a hard man following legalism and very much a power mover dictator. Right? Why would he go after philosophy and poetry and history? And my students were clever. They went right to it. Alternate views. He didn't want any other views. To a philosophy that would cause people to think differently, to see alternatives. Poetry that would move them so they would experience things differently. History, so they saw that things were different in the past and didn't necessarily end in Qin Shi Huangdi, right? He actually cut off history, said history began with him. I was also laughing at the time because the first emperor burned the books and he tried to control the narrative, and he derided all other views as fake information. You know where this is going. He was hostile to foreigners, wanted to build a big wall. And here's another thing too, he wanted to live forever bodily. So he had the Taoist alchemists brewing up potions for him, and one of the ingredients was cinnabar. Cinnabar is mercury oxide. It's a rich rust brown color, and it was associated with royalty, and so he was imbibing this. Do you know what happens when you imbibe mercury on a regular basis? Probably he killed himself trying to live forever, right? But he's a dictator trying to control knowledge, building a wall, and he was turning orange by the end of the I'm just saying. Like what Mark Twain wrote, history does not repeat itself, but it rhymes. Okay, so STEM alone could be problematic. Actually, some people in Silicon Valley and elsewhere have seen that, and they are adding art to the mix, right? Science, technology, engineering, art, and math, because they realize, for one thing, how important visualization is. We're making models. If you go into the work of Einstein or of Hawking's or of Feynman, they were all, the breakthrough insights like relativity, they visualized it first. They went through thought experiments, imagination, right? It also helps to have a working model when you're trying to figure things out. It helps you to figure them out. That's why we say figure it out, because there's a figure involved, right? So that's good, but that still leaves out the humanities, right? We get the STEAM, but not the hope. And that's my little acronym for the humanities. Humanities opens people's eyes. That is, it introduces them to a new way of viewing the world, or new forms of experience. And that's what I hope in history as well, right? The world was different in the past. We should know what culminated in the present, not to foreclose it, not to worship the past, but to know how those forces came together, and the horizon of the future is always open. It's not determined by the past. Okay, so that's the corny acronym. Here's the challenge. Some of you may be aware of this. There are valid and invalid critiques of the scientific reasoning and the logic that's involved in some critical theory, or what's been done with it. when I was in grad school, so I came into, I wandered through my education. Students don't hear this. Started out in engineering, got a bachelor's in psychology, went to work in international agriculture like you do, and then went into literary studies. Encountered critical theory for the first time as a graduate student. That was a mind trip. During my time in grad school, Alan Sokol was a physicist, and he was himself politically and socially liberal. Most of ours call him progressive, but he was liberal, and he was frustrated at what he saw as the empty speech that was being recycled. This was the height of critical theory, high theory. So he wrote this article, right? Transgressing the boundaries towards a transformative hermeneutics of quantum gravity using the jargon of critical theory. It got published in Social Text, which was the premier journal of the time. So passed the peer review, passed the editor, was published. And then the day after it was published, he revealed that it was a hoax. And among other things, in this article, he denied 14 basic tenets of physics, including gravity. And what he said in the article was that gravity was an interpretation. It was nothing but a discourse, a language game. And he said, when he revealed the hoax, he said, if you step off a 14-story building, you're not going to be able to interpret your way out of it on the way down. Right? Now, he was, I think, had a good spirit of positive intent to it. It was a challenge. Just this fall, something similar happened again. The people involved this fall, as I found out more about the background, I thought it was a repeat, except it was a little bit worse. They did not have the positive intent that he did. They had targets in mind ahead of time. What they did was, well, there's ethical problems, right? To create fake identities and try to push false research. However, so there are problems with what they did, and their motives were bad. But the problem is still there. They published 7 articles in journals that were valid peer-reviewed journals in these different academic subfields. They got them published. Another 7 were under consideration. Now, to be fair, they also had 6 that were rejected outright. They wrote these articles not just with empty jargon, but they made they were self-contradictory. There were major gaps or jumps. They had evidence that didn't agree with the conclusions. They purposefully constructed them wrong, but they used the right words, the catchphrases and the terms. So 6 rejected outright, 7 were still under consideration. The person who blew this was not one of the editors, it was a journalist who said, this is outrageous, this can't be, right? Some of the titles. So when they revealed it, just to put that in context, 7 acceptances, and maybe more on the way. Every one of those acceptances had 2 PhDs, 2 experts reviewing the article, and the editors who had PhDs, and they passed it off. Now, there are nasty, unethical aspects to it, but that fundamental problem is still there. How can these kinds of articles that are made up pass muster and get published, and nobody challenges it, nobody realizes it? So, you ever heard of confirmation bias? Everybody has confirmation bias, except for me. It's actually been studied by psychologists. You tend to credit information that agrees with what you already believe. You give it a greater weight, and you tend to discredit information that goes against what you already believe. Everyone does it. They do it in the sciences. The scientific method was constructed to try to screen that out. And I think we could learn from that. One other quick story from that. So I went to a conference once and heard someone who attacked science as a whole, right? And said, so scientific theories were just fabrications, they were arbitrary constructions of co-articulated power knowledge that were ensembled together in a meaningless jumble. I can't recreate everything. So after I heard this, I went up to him after the talk. He was standing there. I asked him how he came to the conference. And he flew in a jet. And I said, did it worry you at all that you were flying in a co-articulated power knowledge discourse that was arbitrary and had nothing to support it? And he just turned and walked away. I'm not popular. Anyway. So, let me suggest that we take some of our most useful and productive theoretical approaches are the metaphors for them. Metaphors are creative, but tweak them a little bit. Okay, so entering the conversation. But not all conversations are equal. We have to do the work to enter the conversation. We can enter a conversation with science. And any conversation should have a point. It should have a purpose. Is it going somewhere? And my fellow department members who are here, I love you to death, but when we have a department meeting and I hear somebody say, we should have a conversation about that, I go, oh, there goes another year. Right? Where is it going? Where is it going? Lenses. You can try different theoretical lenses, different ways of looking at the world. I also do that. It doesn't have to just be current critical theory, by the way. You can go into different worldviews from the past and try that as well. But are all lenses equal? I hear some people talking as though it's just shuffling from one to the other and one to the other, and not considering the purpose for the lens, right? It would be a bad thing if you use, so let's talk about lenses from science, because that's where the metaphor is coming from. If you use a microscope to look at the stars, or a telescope to look at viri, that's not very appropriate. Maybe some lenses are better than others. I need corrective lenses. My natural vision is blurry, right? So corrective lenses, maybe there's a better way of seeing things. Performance for me is the linchpin. I no longer believe in the golden elixir, the silver bullet or whatever, but performance, because it is actual. It's where our belief and our practice come together, and you have to do something. There's a result, an act. It's a combination of process and product. If you know anyone, so think about, my son plays the flute, another son is learning tennis. If you think about any skill, it takes a while to gain that skill and get better and better the more you practice it. That's process. But then there's an actual performance, a time when everything comes together, when you're actually playing on the stage or you're in a match or what have you. And that is valuable too. It's a temporary distillation of everything that you've been working through. And then it doesn't end there. There are other performances. There are other matches. So you rise up through the process, pause, gather it together in the performance, and then back to process and keep moving on that way. So the root meaning of the word essay, that's Montaigne, I think, from France. Essayer, right? To try, to attempt. Essays are just supposed to be attempts. They're a temporary distillation of the knowledge, the view that you have at the time, right? So whenever you students, you're turning in essays for courses, say, hey, I'm just trying. It's just an attempt, right? But actually, I think we should view everything that way and try to interweave those. And also ask, are better performances possible, right? We've been discussing utopias here. Sometimes utopias are just empty ideals, or it gets difficult. I love the Pacific colony, right? That it was, everything was great until they actually had to dig the ditch, and then it got rough. Well, it's hard in the actual practice to do. So can we learn something from performance to performance so it's actually going somewhere? It's developing. You get better performances. And that's going to lead me back to ancient India. Didn't see that coming. Okay, so this is something that I came across early in my own research and career. It's made a difference to me, and I want to inflict it on you now. It's going to be leading indirectly into the poetry later, but I'm going to start off with drama. So ancient Indian drama is called Drishya Kavya. Kavya means something that is inspired, so it's an inspired work of art. Drishya means it is to be seen. It's visual. So a visual poem is what it means. It's actually a total performance because you can see there are gestures, postures, expressions, the hair, the ornamentation, the body language. And the people who are trained for these visual poems, were trained to give a certain kind of performance. It was called a yoga, by the way, so it's a discipline. They were supposed to be able to memorize conventional signs and natural signs. So a conventional sign would be, what does this mean, right? Wait 3 seconds. Actually doesn't mean wait, hold off a little bit. Some of the posturing of their body, the body language is natural. It is a natural sign. I'll get into that a little bit more in a second. They were supposed to be able to cause their skin to flush at will or turn pale at will. Horripilation, a word I rarely get to use outside of Scrabble. That means your hair standing on end, goosebumps, right? They were supposed to have that kind of tonal control. And it's a combination of artificial, arbitrary, conventional signs and natural bodily signs. And that's what interested me. So, you know, I'm not going to model this for you. Not going to get near that with incredible control, right? And being able to do the different mudras, the gestures and forms. There's Shiva. Shiva, the destroyer, but he destroys ignorance and bad things, bad performances. You have to destroy in order to create. It's also part of their theory of art. Right? Not Michael Flatley, the Lord of the Dance. And the individual performance, you're supposed to control all these elements, right? So the eyes. I'm going to be bridging over into cognitive science here, right? We have a part of our brain that is devoted to registering eyes. And right now they think the reason we have the whites of our eyes, don't move till you see the whites of their eyes. Well, it's because we're registering where the other is gazing, what they're looking at. So we can read the other, we try to see their eyes and not let them see our eyes, controlling the gaze. So they're supposed to be able to do the eye language. Any guesses what that might mean? Or what does it suggest to you, looking that way? The whole expression and the eyes.
Something going on over there.
Okay, you know something's going on over here that she's looking at. What'd you say?
No, you didn't.
And actually, that's kind of what it means. She's supposed to be in love, but not too forward, a little bit shy about it. That's the holding off, right? But some natural signs, as well as some that are ornamentations or building out from the body into other kinds of signs. Cosmetics. Take what is part of the body and exaggerate it and take it further. I'll do this now. Somewhere very, very arbitrary, very conventional. So if you're going to be a young woman who is miming Shankara rasa, it's the romantic feeling. So you're supposed to, let's see if I get this straight. One hand down here, the other like this, foot in contrapposto, so it's angling out. Ashley's going to laugh at me, who's really in dance, right? And she's supposed to only walk swinging her hips and just walk in small. I look like a really deformed Charlie Chaplin or something. They do it gracefully, right? That's arbitrary. If you don't know that convention, you wouldn't know that at all. You see how her hands are painted? This was an up-close performance. They have, and there are thousands of hand signs. To be an audience member in these performances, you had to be exquisitely trained. Now, some of them might be natural, but lots are arbitrary. And I couldn't resist the pun. It's a handbook. Anyway, now all that is supposed to build the rasa. Rasa is the essence. So when you take seeds and press the oil out of them, or if you're making perfume or something like that, just squeeze the essence out. That's rasa. Taste, the tea, what comes from chai, that's rasa. They apply that to the experience of art. And so that art is supposed to convey this essence, and it does so by a slight one level of abstraction, going from the actual experience, the actual emotions, and making it one step more general. So it's a virtual experience of a basic human emotion. I'm going to get to those emotions in a minute. But it's evoked by signs and symptoms that they're supposed to be able to mime, so there's mimesis, right, or imitation. Or they're supposed to perform, and it is a performance, but it's a performance of a sign that sometimes is natural, and sometimes can simulate an emotion, or sometimes stimulate one in the audience. That was the idea. I'll give you an example of that from my own life. So my first child, poor first child, he was pouting. You know, he's a baby. I don't remember how many months old, 3, 4 months old, and he did this pout. It was a magnificent, you know, full face. And it was so cute. My wife said, "Stay there. I'm gonna go get the camera." Right? So she runs off and gets the camera, and he's not making the face anymore when she comes back. So I went up to him, and I went, and he started doing that too. And then he started crying. And I said, hurry up and get the picture. That's the way parents are. But anyway, there are certain signs that we can give that provoke a sign. That's mimesis, right? And I can write it up. That's what they're using in their art form consciously. For us to have its full effect, you have to have a sensitive audience, an open audience. You have to engage with it. You can shut yourself off from it, of course. But if you engage with it, they talk about it growing what we would call emotional intelligence as a result of the experience of art, being there in the theater. And it would even switch to make your heart grow big. I think The Grinch Who Stole Christmas, right? At least the old version. So that's what they're trying to do, but they went a step further. They like to codify everything, right? So this is from the Dunya Loka. It's an ancient treatise on how to make suggestions via art, primarily in the dance and theater, although it's also extended into poetry. So you've got the rasas, the aesthetic moods, are 8, in some lists there are 9, and they're based upon what they considered a stable emotion. Thayibaha means a stable emotion. They think these are emotions that all human beings have, and they're resident within you. If you didn't have those emotions, art would not appeal to you at all. But look at if you think of a setting, we would think about those as genres. It's a kind of reader response sort of thing, right? Based on the emotional reaction. But romantic, tragic, heroic adventure, thriller, horrific, gross out, comic, marvelous. This is 2,000 years old. Has nothing to do with so-called Western society or modern science. It's ancient science because it's organized knowledge and observation, right? And the basic emotions, desire, grief, energy, anger, fear, disgust, laughter. I mean, those are translations, but that's what the terms mean, right? And then the neutral or peaceful, if you had the knife. So I thought, those are genres I would recognize. Those are emotions I would recognize. And when I already had that in mind, because I've been working with this for a while, I came across some more recent research about the stable emotions, the basic emotions. This is cognitive science, study of emotion. It's recent. This study of the pictures was in 2011. Matsumoto Wang, right? And this has been replicated over since 2000, many, many times. And this is the list that they came out with, right? They had different people with different expressions. And they would ask people to make the expressions. They would ask people to recognize the expressions. And they carefully controlled scientific studies, right? Double blinds. And that's what they came up with. Joy, surprise, sadness, contempt, anger, disgust, fear. And most of those map right onto that. Right? Even there's some add an 8th, the neutral expression, which might correspond to the peaceful one. Now in ancient India, flipping back there, so actually don't have pictures of ancient India. This is a actor who's trained in a medieval school of acting, but it's coming out of that ancient one. And that's him with the conventional expressions of these different basic emotions. Now some, like surprise or wonder, okay, fear, those are something I recognize. Others, not so much. This is bravery. that to me is, I just volunteered for what? Which maybe is valor, I don't know. This one is wrath. That looks like constipation to me. Right? So some of it is exaggerated or stylized to the point I wouldn't recognize it anymore, but it's supposedly based on natural emotions and trying to send out signs that signal those emotions to an audience. Right?
Maybe he's a bad actor.
Well, yes, you can't screen out bad performer, okay. Right? So they did back to the modern cognitive science to test these basic emotions. They went to every continent except Antarctica, and they had people make the expressions or photograph them while they're having those emotions and recognize them. And this is that they came up with, right? Because there's always the confirmation bias is always a problem. You may be reinforcing what your own culture does, right? Do you recognize this emotion? What would you guess it is?
I just stubbed my toe.
Just very particular if you were going to broaden that too. What would you say it is? Sorry, I really like the kids. They just, What is it? Anger. Okay. What about this one in the middle? Sadness. And the one at the top? Happiness. Somebody said something else, right? Well, maybe variations, but it looks like there are some. Now you notice I have up there minimal universality, because when you engage with science, this is what happens. You're doing the little last-minute research to kind of put the touches on your speech that you're giving 2 days from now, and you find out that the scientific research has changed in the last 2 years since the last time you checked in with it, and that the idea that there are 7 basic emotions has been called into question. It's called into question. It's not proven or disproven, one way or the other. But they went to the Trobriand Islands, and they were there with some people, and what looks like fear to others, they say is an anger face, right? So, not entirely so, but that's the way science works. And if you work with science, or the results of science, you have to be willing to change and shift. But if we're committed to, well, academic honesty, but also to non-essentialism, we should be willing to change and shift. That's responding to the environment, responding to what other people have discovered, or their thoughts. Here's another cognitive science experiment. I got this from Richard Schechner's Performance Studies. Brilliant work if you haven't read it. It's gone through 3 editions now. He talks about levels of performance. That means going from what's happening in the brain, the smallest scale, to unconscious body language, to conscious body language, what he calls bits, to expressions, scenes, all the way up to social macro dramas. So he's got 7 levels. Anyway, this one particular one, they hired some actors, and they asked them to position their face feature by feature. They did not say, in fact, the blind was, they're supposed to be doing some kind of facial modeling, but it had nothing to do with emotion. They're just supposed to position features one by one. And when they have them position the features in recognizable, or to the point they wanted, people recognized what those emotions were, that they artificially constructed. And that's artificially constructing a natural sign, which is interesting. But here's the other weird thing they didn't expect. When the actors started doing these expressions, they didn't know what they were, they started feeling the emotion. Why? Well, it's not magic. We have neurochemical signals going back and forth all the time. We spend our entire life making these expressions. And when you make the expression, it activates the pathway, because it's a feedback loop. Another quick study, it's a former student sent this to me. It was great that they took pictures of people who won, I think it was, judo competitions at the Olympics. And they took pictures, and cameras are so good now, right? And they took pictures of the winners at the moment they won. And at the moment they won, their expressions were all the same, regardless of what country they came from. Microseconds later, 300 some microseconds later, they masked that natural expression with what was considered culturally appropriate. It's that fast. We're good actors. We're natural actors. All right, here's the big question. Is there such a thing as human nature? Can we talk about it anymore without committing essentialism, without bringing up old stereotypes? So, centuries ago, at the beginning of the Enlightenment, certain individuals confidently held forth about what human nature was, right? And its unchanging one, it's there at the core. Problem is, limited data said it was all white, upper-class, straight males making those assertions, right? And they said that's what was universal. In the past few decades, with the rise of critical theory in the 60s on up to the present, a lot of intellectuals in the humanities have said, gone to the opposite extreme. There isn't any universal human nature at all. We can't even talk about it in some places. If you mention anything like that, you're treated as naive or a fool, or you're going with the past dominant structures of oppression, and so forth. There's the problem, though. Is science universal? Are there aspects to it? Do you ride in planes as you go to conferences? Do you work on computers? Do you take medicine? And do you count on it working in a reliable way all the time? And what about human rights? And the critical theorists realized this was a problem to begin with. If you remove the concept of the human, what about human rights? And human rights for everyone. It is an open subject of debate, right? But it's something to consider and not just cast out. You don't want to undercut all grounds for any kind of rights, or at least I don't. one thing that I have found with a lot of people, they're dealing with concepts of science that are 50 or 100 years old. They don't realize how things have changed recently. And by the way, I should say, it's a matter of degree. I subscribe to Science News. Every 2 weeks in my inbox and in email, I get this little journal, which is a distillation by really gifted science writers of the cutting edge, what has been discovered in the past couple of years. But it's a little digest, a little summary. It provides you with the links if you want to go into something further yourself. But a lot of times, well, I just want to know what's out there because it's useful. When I was teaching the story of David, for example, just recently, and came across a recent discovery of a Philistine graveyard. And they're doing the genetic sample studies on the bodies. They will soon know where the Philistines come from, not the ones that hate art, but the ones who lived in Palestine a long time ago, right? That's interesting and useful information. It gives me more context about that historical period. Or just recently with satellite imaging, I think it was near Copan, some Mayan sites. So there's satellite imaging of what's below the ground and below the vegetation. They found there were 60,000 undiscovered Mayan sites. That civilization was much more extensive than they knew, and now they know where to look and do the archaeological work. That's interesting, that's useful. So, all kinds of things coming in from the sciences we could take advantage of. In terms of human history, right, and getting into evolution, which is going to be the most problematic and contentious thing to engage with, recent genetic evolutionary biological science says we inherit a common human nature. It is biological, genetic, and cognitive, but it responds to its environment and develops. It's flexible and adaptable, no biological determinism. And even further, now they've got some evidence that a very modified thin Lamarckian trait, we can now affect our genes by experiences, and those genetic traits can be passed on to infants, to the next generation. Okay? So new things happening, and that's all going to be problematic. So I want to talk about 4 fields that I think that humanists and artists should be in touch with, but especially people who are doing literary studies. And closely related fields. So I'm going to go into modern psychology, especially cognitive science, and then linguistics, ecology and eco-criticism, and do evolution last because that's the most controversial, I think. Right? So cognitive or neuroscience, so these terms are used now instead of just psychology. I go with them because they have pretty pictures. Pretty, oh, that's my brain. This is your brain on music. They actually have done that kind of work. They're now at the point where they're able to follow single neural pathways. So we have billions of them, right? But they can go neuron to neuron and look at exactly what is triggered when. They're going to have memory worked out soon, what happens when you perceive things, what happens when you experience things, how those networks are set up. It is not old school psychology, however, and with apologies, Freud and Lacan are only taught in departments of English and literary studies. And I know a lot of work has gone into that, and people can use the ideas metaphorically perhaps or something like that. But if there was any traction to it, it would be taught in psychology, and it no longer is. They're footnotes, right? So Stanislaus Dehaene, well, he's a modern researcher, and 100 years from now, things are going to look different too, right? I highly recommend these. He did a study of what happens when we do math in our brain, and able to, again, go into the centers that are doing that. Reading in the brain, I think everybody who goes into English education should read that one, so you know exactly how the hardware is working, right? I'll show you a couple slides from it in a second. And then he kind of combined all that to what you can say about self-awareness and consciousness. In that last book, I looked up Lacan and Freud. Freud's not even there. Lacan, there was one footnote, and that was it. Lacan said the unconscious is structured like a language. It isn't. Next. It should at least give you pause if you're working with ideas that are using Freudian or Lacanian psychology to think about it, whether it needs to be questioned or reformulated at the very least. So what he's doing, reading in the brain, for example, well, this is from me. I think it's remarkable, if you think about it, that writing developed around the world at different places at different times independently. So there are cases of borrowing, like the alphabetic script came from the Phoenicians, biblos, it's where you get our words, bibliotheca, bibliography, and so forth from. And that went into both Greek and therefore Latin. It went into Hebrew and Aramaic and Arabic script, right? Those are borrowing. But others are independent, like the Sumerian cuneiform, borrowed by the Akkadians and others. Egyptian hieroglyphs are separate, and then in separate parts of the world, right? Chinese script over there, the South Indian and some later Southeast Asian scripts, developing from one common one, and Mayan, which has just recently been deciphered. They've been working on that, and now they've deciphered it. They can read 90% of the Mayan text that they couldn't before. Right? Now, on the surface, those might all look different. I mean, they are different scripts. They work in different ways. But what Dehane did was look at how the brain processes it. Now, this one is taken from English letters, or Roman script, and cursive and print, right? But actually, our eyes look at contrast first, straight lines, and he pointed out that all written script are made of straight lines and curved lines, and they're the lines set against a background that contrasts with it, usually dark against light, but can be the reverse, and they are parallel or they meet in junctures and so forth. And it doesn't matter what script it is. Human brains process writing the same way in every single written language. Goes into the lateral geniculate sulcus and on. He does. We used to think it was a very straightforward process. It's more complicated, but it's also something that you can study and learn. And this is how it happens. It goes out from the visual area into that letter box of the brain, hooks up with the part of the brain that stores sound, images, and a part that stores meanings, and those are two separate things, and goes from that to the rest of the brain. Mirror neurons, motor neurons, and so forth. And a part of the brain, I'll say that now because I'll forget later, a part of the brain that stores social information and ethics. So you may have heard of this, is that Joshua Green is at Harvard, he's doing some of this work, and he's studying emotional and ethical decision making. So you might have heard of this experiment before. They had, so they set up this thought experiment and were measuring people's responses to it, physiological as well as what they actually decided to do. And the thing is, you get 5 people down there, runaway train. Train is going to hit those 5 people, right, unless something happens. And here's the experiment they set up. What would you do if you could push someone in front of the train and that would derail it, killing the person, but you'd save the other 5? Versus, if you were on a platform, far removed, and touching a button, and you caused the train to go on a sidecar that ended up killing 1 person, but saving the 5. The vast majority of people could not even imagine pushing someone physically themselves. But they could push a button and do it at a distance. Now, logically, they're the same. You kill 1 person to save 5. In absolute rationality, that's the way it would be, but that's not how we process things. So that was interesting in and of itself. But I noticed something further. He was using stories to test ethical response. And the parts of our brain that are really good at stories are linked into those parts that store social information and ethical decision making. That's interesting, and that's really useful. So stories do have moral. It may not be the simplistic moral that they were pushing on you, or maybe that's why those stories work, because they tap into that part of the brain that wants to make that decision. But we can retrain to make more complex, better decisions. So all this is coming together in a field called cognitive poetics, looking at how all these things impact what we do when we read, how we decode text and so forth, talking about the origin of art and aesthetic experience, how feeling, perception, and subjectivity is represented. So this is a going concern, a field within literary studies. I'm going to go quickly through these. Oh my gosh. I'm going to go really quickly through these. Too many stories the wrong way. Linguistics. I love linguistics. It's dry, cold, abstract. Shall I compare thee to a summer day? That can be graphed very quickly. Sorry, tree diagram, there it is. It's based on neural anatomy. There are linguistic universals. I watched my wife work with them to discover and help to curate and save the Chukchansi language, right? So there's a language project because the language is dying out. The last 12 native speakers are dying. And that was done at their request in service to them. But I watched her reconstruct the language and figure out how it worked. That was amazing. So I used that for learning Sanskrit. She used it for preserving the language. Ecology, I'm going to skip through this because eco-criticism you've probably heard of before, looking at the ways nature is represented in the text, also considering the text itself as a little mini ecosystem. Evolution, there's Angel, it's not quite rhizomatic, is it? But it's not the old tree either that's simplistic. Actually, this is not good because there should be a huge rhizome here, right? A branching system of roots and branches all over. It's really messy and complicated. This is far too simplistic. But why not approach that too and use it? If there is something, I mean, it's funny sometimes to me because I get stopped by both religious fundamentalists and people who are really into radical social constructionism, who don't want biology used in the study of literature, because there have been racist formulations in the past. I know about social Darwinism and eugenics and so forth. You're right to question that. But that was also bad science, is the thing. I was going to have a lot more about that, but I'm not going to because of time. Is that right? That clock's right? Oh my gosh. Anyway, this is what I'm working on, biopoetics, applying all these sorts of sciences to poems and stories and asking why they affect us. Can I go over 5 minutes?
Yes.
Okay. That's what all that's in my head when I'm trying to translate Sanskrit poetry, or at least in the background, right? So Vijika has been called for shorthand the Sappho of India. I hate those comparisons sometimes, but she was the greatest body of work is left over. She's got 35 poems that I've been able to find and study and translate. This is what's known about her, and I've found out some things from the poems themselves and also using oral histories. She was from a southern kingdom. She was a noblewoman at court. She celebrated desire over duty, right, and called herself equal to the goddess Saraswati, means flow, which is the goddess of poetry. She's working with dhvani, or suggestion, how to work those networks. By the way, those networks of suggestion, right, the third level of poetry, is probably because of the way our brains work. All those different interconnections, the branching neurons, that's why you have indirect suggestions. So here's some of my, this is the one I read at the beginning, right? And just real quick, because I want to get the literature. Sorry, I should have been watching the time. Hey, neighbor woman, will you keep an eye on our house a moment? The child's father finds the water of the well, of our well, tasteless. So alone I'm going to that choice spot by the river, behind the tree's cover. They may scratch my breast, those dense weeds with their hard stems. Now that's just a poem about a wife doing her duty and going down to the river to get water. Except what's being suggested, I love this indirection. She is celebrating her own desire above her dharma under the context of performing that duty, right? Asking for an ally, neighbor woman. You keep an eye on my house for a minute. And the telltale thing is the child's father. Not my husband, but the baby daddy, right? He doesn't like the water of our well. He finds it tasteless, so I'm going somewhere else. And she goes down by the river where there's dense screening trees and reeds, and she has an excuse for why she's going to come back with her body marked, right? It's a lovely, elegant poem. So this is someone who's performing on 2 levels. She's performing her desire indirectly in the poem, and she's performing the semblance of duty and dharma on the surface at the same time. It helps to know the context, and this is where I'm bringing more of an eco-critical perspective in. Monsoon is the season of love and sexuality and desire. It is the season when nature springs up and flourishes. There are things bursting into new leaves and flowers. It's also the time, if you're with someone in a socially sanctioned relationship, where you can enjoy carnal delights at home, you're in home, enjoying that for months. If you have something on the side, you go outside, because nobody's outside when it's raining that much for months, and you go down and do it wild and enjoy it there. And I have. That's a scene from a modern Bollywood movie. It's still a trope in Indian traditions, right? And it's nature. The place where you go to enjoy love by yourself is down by the river, because that's a place of refreshing, refreshment from the water, and also a place where nature is fertile and flourishing. I like this poem very much. I tried to suggest it in the form of the poem. In the original, they're all tightly structured metrical poems. I did the pieces, the metered pieces in separate lines to try to give some sense of that structure, the structured feeling. She's talking to the Marala River, which she personifies. And as she personifies the natural river, she also naturalizes her desire. And every phrase in this poem can refer to the river or can refer to herself. Your bottom sandy, dense shadows dangling from curvy edges, cool breaths of wind lay bare a spot of tinkling water beads. She, free of restraint, loves ceaselessly. His refreshes changes. Do tell, Marala, who clothed you in screening reeds and trees? Right? Who put those things that keep you from exhibiting your natural beauty? And she's relaxing into her body down by the river and enjoying the river and that scene even as she's enjoying her body. The Marala is a goddess. It is also the place where she enjoys herself. Right? She also does one other thing. I'm going to end with this one, right? Because I'm trying to understand there and then, and I'm trying to understand her performance in and through this art, in and through this poetry. But she did the same thing in her poetry. She takes on different perspectives and performs them, right? That one about the neighbor woman, probably not her. If she's a queen at court, she's actually more constrained in her movement and her desire. But she can give voice, poetic persona to someone who is freer. Or in the case of the next poem, she's talking about a village girl, a country girl, out on the edge of things. Right? Wonderful enjambment in this poem. In this case, it's both a poetic device and it's literal because the limbs are fused together. After making love up on a platform in a cucumber field, her thin body squeezed, tiny hairs thrilling, fused in her lover's limbs, both arms clasped in sheer delight around his neck to ward off howling jackals. This it girl uses her foot now and then to make a tinkling racket, swinging a shell necklace, hanging on a vine from the fence top to jangle into the night. It's a young, simple village girl who's experiencing the delight of desire and sex. And she's fully into it. And Vijika is trying performatively, imaginatively going into that experience and saying, of course, this other person has that kind of experience. And she also is making a semblance of her duty. She's supposed to be up there on a platform guarding the cucumber patch from jackals. I didn't know jackals were into cucumbers, but apparently they are. They run in and steal them. So she's just making the barest pretense of keeping the duty going by jangling a shell necklace, oddly draped over the fence, right? But in the meantime, she's there fused with her lover. And that's there in the poem, and it's what the poem is celebrating. So that's what I hope we can do if we get into conversation with the sciences. Not just humanities opening people's eyes, but how to optimize performance everywhere. Oh yeah, I end with a dumb act.